Well, welcome to this special episode of SharePoint Framework for Beginners. This one bumper episode will contain everything you need to build a web part completely from scratch. This is the web part that we're going to build. It's a ReactJS web part that displays a message to the user. The user can then dismiss that message. Their choice will be stored and retrieved from a SharePoint list. It'll have intuitive properties such as a list picker and respond to section color changes. At the end of the episode, we're going to deploy it to live. So throughout this episode, we're going to look at the following points. Setting up the version 1.12.1 development environment on Windows. Scaffolding a ReactJS web part. Reading and writing to SharePoint lists. Adding properties and responding to section theme changes, and at the end of it all, we're going to build and deploy our web part to live. At the end of this episode, you'll have everything you need to build a web part from scratch. Now, as this is the 20th episode we've done, throughout this episode, I'm going to refer to other ones which go into certain subjects we'll consider in more detail. So stick with me as we build a web part together, and if you've seen the other episodes, you know what I'm going to say next. Let's dive straight in. So the first step is to install Node Version Manager. Node Version Manager does what it says on the tin. It allows us to manage versions of Node. In this example, we're going to install NVM on Windows. So in order to use NVM, we first need to download it. I've put all the links below that we're going to be using, but for now you need to go to github.com/corybutler/nvm-windows. And if you go to downloads and you go to releases, you'll see NVM setup. I've also put a link below on how to set this up on a Mac as well. So once NVM is installed, we need to install the latest version of Node that's compatible with the SharePoint Framework version 1.12.1. So if you go to Node.js and look at releases, at the time of recording, the latest supported version is 14.17.5. Now, if you go to your console and type node-v, you'll see we'll get an error. And that's because we need Node Version Manager, NVM, to install Node for us. So how do we do that? Well, we type at the command prompt nvm use 14.17.5. We accept the prompt. And now it's installed. If you put node -v, you'll see that we've now got the version of Node installed that we want. The next thing we need to do is install Visual Studio Code to develop our web part in. So in order to do that, you need to go to code.visualstudio.com, download the install package, accept the agreement, click Next and Add to Path, launch VS Code, restart for the path to take effect. So now we've done that, at the terminal we need to install Gulp. Gulp is used to run various tasks that we need in the build process. So to install Gulp we need to type nvm install gulp --global or just --g. The next thing we want to do is install Yeoman. Yeoman will allow us to scaffold our web part with some built-in templates. To install Yeoman, type npm install yo --global. The final thing we want to do is install the Microsoft generator for Yeoman. And the way we do that is we type npm install at Microsoft/generator-SharePoint --global. Once that's installed, we're ready to go. So one extra Gulp step we need to do is create a trust certificate for the development environment. But we can't do that until we've created a project. So that's what we're going to do now. Go to your development folder, make a folder for your project. At this point, it's worth noting that Yeoman has a hidden file that tells it what version was running to create a solution. So it's worth having an extra folder for each of your solutions. And then we type at the command prompt, yo. First time accept statistics or not, and type a solution name of message. We want SharePoint Online, and we want to use the current folder. We accept default for deploying across a tenant and answer no to any special API permissions. We choose Webpart and then we type the name urgent message with no spaces. We add a description and then we choose React. And then we allow it to build. Now for the first time, it's installing lots of packages, so it's probably a good time to go get yourself a cup of tea. npm is installing packages, so it'll be faster next time it is run. But if you see lots of vulnerabilities and errors, don't worry, because these aren't packaged up with your Webpart when it's deployed to SharePoint Online. Microsoft sort out the packages that support your Webpart. Now, as a one-off task for your environment, you need to create a developer certificate, and you do this by typing gulp trust-dev-cert. This may look like it's doing nothing. It took a while when I recorded this. Then we accept the security warning, and now the certificate has been installed for us. So we need to build our Webpart. We type gulp build, and then to run our Webpart, we type gulp serve. If prompted, allow access to our Webpart. Choose your browser if it's the first time you've run this. I use Edge. You can use Chrome, is recommended as well. And then add your default Webpart. You'll notice that it's also got the property description in there as well. Edit the description and you'll see the changes appear in your Webpart. Now take a look at the package.json file and you'll see you're running version 1.12.1. So congratulations. You have set up a development environment for SharePoint Framework development. Now let's look at accessing lists. From our Webpart, we're going to need a simple list to store the user's acknowledgement. When the user clicks the dismiss box, then it will write a record to the list so that it won't be loaded on the next page refresh, and the message won't be displayed the next time a user goes to that page. To reset this, we would simply empty the list so the user record wasn't in there anymore. It's just a simple example that could be expanded out later on. So we need to create the list. So you'll see that I've got a test site. I click New List. I choose Blank List. I call the list Response. I add a description and we click Create. We'll simply reuse the title column to store the user when they click to dismiss the message. In our project, we're going to use the Patterns and Practices or PnP libraries to access our lists. So bring up a terminal window, ensure that we're using the right version of Node, install the @pnp/sp library using the Node package manager. Now let's investigate our source Webpart folder and open the Webpart's TS file. We are not going to add a property to configure the list we're going to use. We're going to do that a bit later. Instead, we're just going to put the unique identifier or the GUID of the list. Later, we're going to show a great PnP property that you can use to choose your list. To get the GUID or the unique identifier, go to List Settings and select the GUID from between the %7b and the %7d. Now these GUIDs are unique to your environment, so don't copy the one on this example. Copy the one from your list. Make a note of the GUID in a comment because you're going to need to use it later. So in order to use the PnP SP library, we need to instantiate it. We add a reference to it by typing the following import. Import sp from, and we go to all the presets. Next, we need to initialize PnP SP by adding the following code. We do an async on init function where basically we call its parent and then we say set up PnP SP with the current Webpart context. So that's basically the context is this Webpart and where it lives. So when it's in the live environment, you'll be able to get things like page and other details. Now that PnP SP is bound to the Webpart, let's turn our attention to the tsx file. This can be found in the components folder. The first thing I want to do is re-scaffold this Webpart so it uses the React hooks way of doing things, as I find this better to work with personally. For more information, see the video on using React hooks with the SharePoint Framework. Add the import function component from React. Then add the following code. Const urgent message function component passing in the properties. So from the existing render function, copy this to the return code, remove any references in the code, and export the function as default. So we've now converted the web part to use React hooks. Now we want to wire up a simple test to make sure we can read from the list. Add useEffect to the import from React, and add the following code to create a function that will be called once the web part loads. Later, we will get this function to reload when the user has clicked the checkbox. So we want to do a basic get from a list, and in order to do this, we will need to add the following imports. So we're going to import SP, but also webs, lists, and items. So then we need to put a reference to fetch data, which will be our asynchronous function. So using useEffect, basically we can then call fetch data. So it does this on the first call of the function. And then we need to create the following function, fetch data. And what that's going to do is it's going to wait while it goes to the list by our unique identifier and it gets all the items. We'll then console log that out. So now let's run it, ensuring that we're in the context of a live site where it sits, typing gulp serve and navigating to the workbench. We want to show the browser JavaScript console, and if successful, it should show an empty array. Manually add some values to the list and refresh the web part, and now you'll see those items appear. So opening them up in the console, it shows that we have our items back. In this case, Robert's Dev Talk 1, 2, and 3. So we have an effective method to read from a list. Now let's wire up a checkbox that the user clicks to write back to the list. Add a reference to the Office UI fabric, and from this we're going to import the checkbox control. Next, add a checkbox with the label hide message and a response to the onChange event targeting a function called onChange. And then add the following function to listen for that onChange event, where we're going to console.log that the change event has taken place, and then we're going to get the list, get the items, and add a new one, which will be named Robert's Dev Talk with the date as a date string in it. Now run the web part and tick and untick the checkbox a few times, and you'll see new records appearing in the list. So we've successfully read and written to our list. So the next steps before we move on to properties are: 1. Get the current user ID. 2. Check to see if the user is already in the list. And 3. Write back the user to the list. To get the user, we need to pass it through as a property. Click on the interface for properties, and in this case it's iUrgentMessageProps.ts, and add the property current user string. In the render method, add the line current user to be this.context.pagecontext.user.login name. This is the current user. So now the current user is passed through to our web part, change out fetch data to filter to find only a record where the title is the current user. And we do this by adding on to get one record, the top one, and to filter where the title is equal to the current user and get that. Now change the write back to write the current user as the title. Now use state to store whether to show the message. We need to adjust the import function component useEffect and useState from React, and add a state variable as follows: const showMessage set showMessage equals useState boolean false. This will tell the web part whether to render or not. Add a line to onChange to set showMessage to false after writing a value to that list, and add a line to set showMessage to true if there is no record. If item's length is 0, then set showMessage to true. So we're basically saying at this point, well, no, you haven't clicked that acknowledge, you haven't written a record to the list, so therefore I'm going to show the message. Change the main body to show the message and checkbox if a record does not exist. Run the web part with gulp serve. So when I click on it, it writes to the list and hides the message. As the item now lives in the list with my user, on reload it doesn't show the message. I delete the record and the message shows again. So our web part, in a very basic way, now functions. It reads and writes to a list. However, it doesn't look that great and it's in dire need of some configuration properties. Let's move on to properties and then we'll have a look at the look and feel. We're going to need some properties on our web part. We're going to use a really great PnP property, which is a list picker, which will enumerate all the lists in the current context of where the web part is and allow us to pick one to store our results in and to read from. We're going to need a text box for the message we're going to display, and we're going to use a text box for the checkbox label as well. So the first thing we need to do is add the PnP SP-property-controls. These are the community-driven patterns and practices properties. They're excellent. There's so many to use. In this case, we're going to use the fantastic list property. But it's worth noting that these are defined as reusable property pane components for the SharePoint framework, and I really advise you use them in your projects. Among the many core controls is the one named Property Field List Picker Control, and that's the one we're going to use. To install them in our project, type npm install PnP SP Property Controls --save. On our TS file, add the following import. We're going to import the Property Field List Picker from the Property Field List Picker library. In our props TS file, add the following property, list as a string, and we'll also add it to our web part properties as well. This is going to store the unique ID or the GUID of our list. Now we're going to add a property, this property field list picker. We're going to tie it to use our list property, and we're going to have a label, select a list, and a few other default settings. But notice at the bottom I've put multi-select false. This is because we only want to choose one list. Then we add the list to our render function, so we pass it through. And now we need to add a property for the message and the label. Add these to the props.ts file, label, string, and message string. Add them to the web part properties interface, label, string, message string. And then we add them to our property group, ensuring the correct names are used. Using one for the label. At this time, instead of using the different language settings, I'm just putting the string for the label in there and the string for the label for the message to display. Then we need to add them to our render function. So in render, we pass those through to the tsx file as well. We run gulp serve to test. We go to the online workbench to test it. And when our web part appears and we edit the properties, we can see that our new properties have appeared. Using the list picker, you can choose a list, go to your render function and change welcome to SharePoint to props.message. And now your message will be displayed. Change the checkbox label to props.label. Finally, in the onChange function, change the list GUID or unique identifier to our props.list and do the same in fetch data. Save and run again. Gulp serve to our workbench. Open the properties and choose the response list that we created earlier. For the label, type click to dismiss. And for the message, type the sandwich van won't be coming in this lunchtime, or some useful message that you want to give to your organization. Click on save, then preview and refresh the page. Our message is displayed and so is our click to dismiss. Now I think you'll agree it functions, but it really doesn't look that great, does it? So we need to remove all the inner divs and surround the inner markup with an empty element, or you could put a div in at this point. Remove all of the unused markup, including the class name on the message. So test it again. It doesn't look great, does it? A bit later on we're going to have a look at theming, but for now, open the SAS file, the SCSS file, and remove all styling, leaving just one simple style in for the class urgent message. A little note there, you always need to have at least one item in your class. Type gulp build. Build will ensure that the CSS is rebuilt. Gulp serve, going to our online workbench. And now we have a clean looking web part. However, note what happens when we change the section background. The text doesn't change colour, which really isn't very good, is it? Fortunately, we can respond to theme changes and act accordingly. Let's add some theme events into our web part so that we can style as needed. So in our TS file, add the following import. Import theme provider, theme changed event args, and iRead-only theme all the way from Microsoft SP component base. Now we add the following. We add theme provider and we add theme variant. And in our onInit function that we used to instantiate PnP SP, add the following. We need to add this theme provider and it consumes that. Then we need to add this theme variant, and it does this by getting the theme from a theme provider. And then we need to add our event for when the theme value changes. Next, let's add a function to handle the theme change event. And when it changes, we simply set the theme variant to the one that's been passed through from our page context. In our props.ts file, add the following import and add the following property theme variant. In our render function, add the following theme variant this.theme variant, and in our tsx file, add the following import. And this import is the read-only theme again. In the tsx return, add the following. Constant semantic colors is the properties theme variant. So this is the current theme that's been passed through. Then amend the div in the return or the render function and add a style that the background color will become a semantic colors body background. So it now looks like this. Change the empty element to a div if you haven't done already, and add that the color or the text color is the body text color of a current theme. So now the background will render the theme color, as will the foreground text. It will render the text theme color. In the tsx file, add iTheme to the import. And for the checkbox, as it's a Fluent UI control, we need to set the theme. And there is one last step, and this is an important step for this all to work. In the manifest.json file, add the following under the component type entry, supports theme variants true. Save everything, run gulp build, run gulp serve, go to our online workbench, and now you can see when we change the section background color, the web part responds. Now it's time to give it a good name, a nice icon, and bundle it up and set it live. So before we set it live, we need to give it a nice icon and a nice name. The icons can be found here at this link. All the links are in the description below. Search for a suitable icon and copy the name, in this case comment urgent. Replace the Office Fabric icon name property and change the title to Urgent Message Web Part. Run gulp build to check it all builds OK, and then bundle and deploy by typing gulp bundle ship and then gulp package solution ship. For more information on this, see the video linked above. So you'll now see a SharePoint folder appear with a package file within it. Drag this package into your app catalog to deploy it. Go to your site and add an app, and from your organization, choose Add Message Client-Side Solution, or whatever you called your solution. Site contents will reveal that it's been deployed to your site. Edit or create a page, search and add your web part, configure it, and test it. Well, congratulations! You've not only set up the development environment, but you've built a web part, you've used React hooks, you've written and read from lists, you've changed to theme events, you've built and deployed everything you need to do when you're developing a web part. You've used property controls, PnP controls to have some really good property controls, and of course to make it easy to read and write from lists. This extra long episode has covered little bits of all the episodes from this series, so I'd encourage you to go and have a look at all the other details in more depth if you haven't done already, of course. The playlist for the series will be available as a link at the end of this video. All the best for your future Webpart projects.
If you've enjoyed this video, then please do give us a like, and if you like this kind of content, then do make sure you subscribe and ring that bell icon so you never miss out on a video.
And if you want to join us on our developer journey, see the link below, and if you're feeling generous, buy us a coffee.
Thank you so much for watching, thanks for your time, happy coding, we'll see you next time.